If you like this episode, please subscribe, share with others, rate and review so we can continue to bring you great programming.
This is The Thing About Cars, a podcast for car enthusiasts and the people who love them.
Hello, this is The Thing About Cars. I'm one of your hosts, Mickey Desai. Very happy to be here early this Sunday morning talking to our special guest, Rebecca Vollman. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. You're joining us from Florida, Central Florida today. And before we talk some more about Rebecca, let's do our usual conspirators. Tim, how are you, Tim?
Doing great, thanks. Good morning.
Good morning. And Ben?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm good. Ben, what's up with this video background you've got going on here?
Oh, that's my garage.
Is that a dream garage setup right there?
Pretty much. My actual garage is about that messy, but just doesn't look that charismatic.
Yes, very good.
It's not as artistically messy as that background.
Right.
You're supposed to have like a backdrop wrangler to make that as messy as it needs to be for the photo.
Something, I don't know.
They just find it in that condition. Tim, let's do our trivia question, and then let's get to learn more about Rebecca.
Okay. All right. So the trivia question, which we will answer at the end of the episode, is what was the origin of the Porsche 911 model name in the early 60s? And our four choices are: A, the new car was primarily designed for North America. The U.S. had just begun promoting the Dial 911 emergency phone number service nationwide. Porsche marketing therefore read Porsche 911. Kein Nordfall, nur Aufwendig. No emergency, just excitement. B, the new 2-liter H6 in the car generated 204 pounds of torque, which converts to the metric 911 newtons. C, Porsche was originally going to call the car the 901, but Peugeot complained that it was too similar to the many three-digit with a zero in the middle Peugeot model names. So Porsche had already purchased a bunch of numbers to apply to the car, so they decided to simply use an additional one in the place of the zero in the middle. Or D, following the success of this 906 and 908 sports prototype racing cars, Porsche decided to capitalize on this by naming the next series of road cars with a three-digit number that started with a 9, and the 909 and 910 concepts did not see production, but the 911 did go into production. A lot of lengthy choices there. I'm not going to go over them again, but we will at the end of the episode when we submit for your best educated answers.
Right. So, Rebecca, I'm trying to figure out how we originally met. I think it had something to do with Dean Case or Loxley Brown. And we met because of your rather extensive involvement with SAE Florida, SAE International, and you're doing some really cool stuff in the automotive space. So I'm trying to decide where to start our conversation. I guess from the beginning, how did you get interested in automotive things?
Yeah, absolutely. I got started. So I actually got diagnosed with cancer when I was in high school. And because of that, I decided that, life is too short to drive a boring car. So I decided that I was going to go out and buy myself a Mustang, which was my dream car. Unfortunately, at that age, I didn't have money to buy my dream car. So I decided that I would build it.
Get out of here.
Yes. Equipped with absolutely zero skills, I went to YouTube and Craigslist, found myself a rolling chassis, and built the car up exactly to what I wanted it to be. And, at that point, that was something that really gave me, I think, my first sense of like true happiness in something that I had created completely myself. Like I knew nobody else on the road has a car like this. And it gave me such a unique sense of pride and joy. And I posted about that journey of building it and going through all of like the troubleshooting that comes with, building a car that sat for quite a couple of years before I got to it, and putting an engine in it, sourcing all that stuff. And through the process of doing that, I actually ended up getting a message on Facebook, and somebody told me essentially my car was done and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. I had taken it apart a couple of different times and I couldn't figure out why the engine wouldn't turn over. And one of my friends through Facebook had asked, hey, like, do you have a diagnostic computer? Have you plugged it in? And I said, no, I don't really have the money for that. And because it doesn't drive, I can't like take it to AutoZone or anything. So I ended up asking him. He had a diagnostic computer because he worked as a mechanic, and he borrowed it from work, took it over, and found out that I had tripped a theft code. So the engine was never going to turn over because it would just cut out any throttle that it was going to be able to be given, and cleared that code, and it started right up. And at that point, he realized, he was like, you built this all on your own? Like, nobody helped you, anything like that? And I was like, you know, I had help getting the engine out of the police interceptor that I ended up buying to put into the car. But that was the only help that I ended up getting. And he was like, do you want a job? Because he's like, I think they'd hire you where I was working. And, you know, ended up going in, and the shop that I did end up getting the job at was female owned, and it was like a super it was an environment that was really conducive to learning. And I really liked that. And that's what kind of got me into cars. And then when I continued to work on them, anybody who knows the mechanics trope, they all hate engineers. But I decided essentially that I was going to, you know, I could probably design the cars better than they did the more I worked on them. So I decided that that was my kind of segue into, maybe I should go to school and, you know, do mechanical engineering and see how I could potentially design these cars better.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So, go ahead, you guys.
Yeah. So Rebecca, which school did you go to?
I ended up going to the University of Central Florida.
Okay. And were you on the Formula SAE team there?
I was.
Oh, cool. And so I'm a Formula SAE graduate. I didn't go to Georgia Tech, but in its early years, we're talking back in 1987 and 88, I was planning on eventually transferring to Georgia Tech and managed to get my foot in the door with the team there in its fledgling two years. So yes, I've been through that process of many late nights and
Yeah, I was on the Formula team for 5 years. My last 2 years, I was president of the team. So first female president in the club's extensive over 50-year history. So really cool. And, you know, I think I still refer to the people that were on my team as my Formula family. You know, you grow these bonds with people through those really late nights at shop, working on a car, finally getting it started up. And again, just that pride that you've built something completely from the ground up, from the design to manufacturing it, machining it yourself and everything, installing it on the car, testing it, validating that performance. And then when the vehicle does start up and you get to kind of collect that data, it's that pride all over again. And those cars, you know, they're my babies. And I absolutely loved the Formula program. It was so fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, we've heard nothing but great things about it from people in and out of the field as well. It's just a fantastic opportunity. I wish more people knew about it and more people took advantage of it. It's absolutely very cool. So, Ben, do you have a question before I ask my next one?
It can wait.
Okay. So Rebecca, you let's go back for a second. You built this Mustang from scratch.
Yeah.
So you sourced a car, you fixed it up, you redid the suspension, presumably. You basically built a Mustang from nothing.
Yes, because I very quickly found out when I was searching for cars that interested me. One, I saw, you know, a Mustang in a movie when I was like 7 years old, and I was like, that right there, that's my dream car. And when I decided that life was too short to drive a boring car, the Mustang seemed like the natural fit for me. So when I started looking to potentially purchase them, I realized any good car I would want was going to be either out of my price range, or it was going to be something that was beat on by somebody before, had raced and crashed. It was going to be a salvage title, anything like that. And I didn't know if I wanted to take on a project like that, not really knowing a lot about that. I know my parents had kind of advised me against it. They're like, you haven't really done anything like this before, what kind of sparked the interest? And I really just ended up the more that I searched, I was kind of like, okay, I've got to go probably a far ways to find a car that I like. And I ended up finding one in Tampa, which was about 3 hours away from my hometown. And from there, I ended up asking one of my coworkers, because my parents and family, nobody would come with me. And I was like, I will buy you coffee and breakfast, and just come with me to Tampa so somebody can drive my other car back. And went to Tampa, ended up getting the car. It needed a transmission because that was completely smoked on it, and didn't have an engine that really worked great at all. So basically ended up gutting the car and just rebuilding everything from there, and sourced the engine from a police auction. I worked with a company that made custom built transmissions, and they worked with me basically to design one so that I had, the really hard, aggressive shifts that I like. And, because I was going to swap it from automatic to manual and do all of the work for that. And it was something that was just super rewarding, and just had this amazing story of, all of the different things that I sourced for it, and painting it, and kind of what really inspired the car to be what it is, or what it was.
Yeah, just amazing. So do you still have the car?
Unfortunately, no. When I was in college, I got an internship to work at BMW, which took me out of state. So I moved to Spartanburg, where BMW has Plant Spartanburg in South Carolina. And I entrusted the car with a friend. And unfortunately, my friend left the door open in the car for the entire about 5 months that I was gone. And in Florida, and where that person lived, it was just not something that you could really do. The humidity and everything trapped into the car, and the seats were leather, but that doesn't stop humidity from penetrating that. So the car essentially became a mold hazard, and because of that, and like most people, have an allergy to mold, and it didn't seem worth it to gut the entire interior and do all of that. So I ended up keeping the car for a couple of years until I found somebody that would give the car a new life. That was my only thing, because I put so much time and money into it. It was my baby. I didn't want to sell it just for parts or anything. So I sold it to a guy who ended up using it for the $2,000 Grassroots Motorsports Challenge. Awesome. And the car was completely gutted, put a roll cage in it, all that good stuff. And, it did pretty well in the challenge. And he also, similar to how I started with the car, kind of posted about that journey over Facebook. So I kind of got to see the car living its new life, which was really cool.
That's really cool. Yeah. That's for those of you who don't know what the $2,000 challenge is, Grassroots Motorsports Magazine does an annual competition in Florida where it's autocrossing, drag racing, and there's the third component, isn't there?
I want to say it's something about like they'll actually grade the build.
Yes, I think so. A little bit like Formula C. Yeah. And the car has to be. The car and its components need to be valued at no more than $2,000, or that they've increased the buy-in by $1 per year, so it's now up to a $2024 challenge. But of course, it's one of those where you can buy a car for $3,000 and sell $990 worth of parts off of it to get yourself back down. So I don't know how much your moldy interior managed to fetch online there, Rebecca, but.
Yeah. I've also read that the enforcement of that rule is pretty sketchy. So,
well, yeah, it's tough to whenever you're ponying up receipts for something. Yes, it's anyone can scrawl out a receipt on the back of an envelope. And
Well, once again, for some reason, I'm wondering about the feasibility of a cross Georgia race. limited function like that. And apparently Dave Pauly, who's not here today, says that you can get insurance. There are people who will sell commercial insurance for those kinds of events, which was my biggest thing. It's like, if we organize this race and someone wipes out, do they get to sue us as a podcast for putting the whole thing together? And unfortunately, the answer is yes, they could. But
right. So it needs to be officially unofficial.
Officially unofficial. That's right. To a pirate race or something. So Ben, you got another question for Rebecca before I go on?
Well, it's from further down the chronology of things in her life. So if we get to that point.
Okay.
So
the question I have before we do move on in that direction is, Rebecca, what are you driving now?
So I drive a 2007 Ford F-250. So kept with the Ford brand, because what better way to learn than if you have to fix or repair it daily? Am I right?
Hi, Misty. You're not even here, and you've been vindicated.
So yeah, Rebecca, you don't know. I don't. One of our regulars is Misty Kennedy. She lives over in the Netherlands, and she is. Suffice it to say, she is not a fan of Fords. So.
No, I do love poking fun at them. I will say, starting out, that now that I'm an engineer, I at least understand that we have to fix that talent pipeline to make sure that there's job security for mechanics.
Right.
But yeah, I decided to go with the F-250 because during my time as a mechanic, actually, and even in all my tinkering on cars, I didn't really get to work on much diesel engines. And that was something that, for me, I'm always looking for that next challenge. So I figured, what better way to learn than get an engine that's, known for blowing up. So I got the 6.0 F-250 and really just learned a lot about, the engines and how the car operates and all these different things. So got to work on, like, a real diesel truck. And I've put about 85K miles on it since, bulletproofed it. So learned a lot about that process, and it's been a fantastic truck for me. And, I think the only thing that my friends will poke fun at me for is I haven't had air conditioning in the car for about 4 years now. And they say that that's impossible in Florida. But, I'm a hair up, windows down kind of gal. So I make it work.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you get out of school, you've got all this knowledge and enthusiasm, you're going to stay in the automotive realm. What came next?
Yeah, so I ended up, thankfully, because I had a pretty, not to toot my own horn, but I had a pretty impressive resume, really, honestly, thanks to my experience in SAE, being able to kind of take whatever I learned out of the classroom and apply it to a real world project. And, having served as a leader on that team for several years, understanding project management, all of that, I also kind of fell in love with the business side of things. Anybody who knows that as soon as I joined the Formula SA team, there was a kind of a contest that they had amongst our members on the team that said, whoever brings in the most sponsorship money gets a free jacket for the team. And my first year I won the jacket, and I got like a female jacket, and I didn't really like the way it fit. So I was like, well, I'll just do it again next year, win, and I'll get a male jacket. And I did that. And then I also won it the third year without even trying. And they were like, we can give you a shop shirt, but we don't really have much other merch. And the leader of the team at that point kind of asked me, he was like, you're really good at like selling this program in our car to different people. So that really kind of, I guess, led me into like the motorsports marketing space. And I also held like a business degree from dual enrollment that I obtained during high school. And I was thinking, I was like, okay, I'm pursuing engineering and I want to do a little bit of the business side, take in my experience and do a little bit of motorsports marketing stuff. And that kind of led me to like, I guess, sales engineering a little bit. So I work for a company currently called ABB, and I like to say they're the biggest company that no one has ever heard of, because they do so much. They're in robotics, electrification, motors, drives, EV chargers. They do everything, but somehow just nobody's ever heard of the company over here in North America. Okay, well, good. We got a couple of ABB knowers. So
They're a customer of my company, actually.
Excellent. Love to hear it. So I started out in a rotational program at ABB and started out kind of in the robotics and automation space because throughout college, I was an intern at Mitsubishi. And we used a lot of their robotics systems, and I loved ABB for the robotics platform. So I thought it was a really good opportunity for me to get into that company. And from there, I kind of moved into the electrification space, and I did a lot of stuff from like EV grid to charger. And then now I just started a new role in ABB e-mobility, and that's, specifically targeting those EV chargers. ABB just launched their new A400, which was named like the best charger at the Association of Clean Transportation Expo. And then in Europe, we're now doing high voltage charging testing. So that's really cool. And we've got a lot of great stuff in the pipeline there. So I'm really excited. And I love being in the space because we get to do so much. Just a couple of, or last week, I guess, ABB launched their partnership with NASCAR and unveiled their different EV kind of test car that they spent millions in R&D for. So it's really exciting to kind of be in that space and see how electrified cars are now going to be going into motorsports a little bit more beyond the scope of Formula E, which is pretty much, in my opinion, at least the only real viable race series that has EVs at a large scale.
Yeah. That and Extreme E if you like off-road stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Amazing. Just amazing.
So what kind of role do you have at ABB?
So I just entered the new role. I am an account manager. So I manage a variety of different accounts that purchase our EV chargers. And they're specifically I'm in the public charging space because we also are on like the fleet side, but that's not so much what I deal with. So I've got like a lot of convenience stores, gas stations, motorsport companies, I can't really name a lot of them, but, we do have like the NASCAR partnership and, there's plenty of exciting things to come from that as well.
It's amazing. Is now the time for me to buy ABB stock?
Yes, I'm always going to say yes to that. I will say, at least I think I'm very blessed to work for a company that I stand behind their product so much, where I didn't have the bias of coming in and kind of being, just sort of washed over with, we're the greatest company ever. I worked with them as, they were a customer when I worked at Mitsubishi before, and I worked with their products. I programmed, their robots, and just the user friendliness, the people at the company, they stand behind what they do. And I really just liked that so much because my, initially at graduation, I was very much like, okay, I've got so many different job offers, but my biggest thing is I've fallen in love with Florida, so I didn't really want to move because a lot of people are like, oh, of course you'll end up in Michigan and you'll work as a design engineer for cars.
Right.
I kind of decided that as I did that, working on the design side at BMW, that it really wasn't a path that I wanted to fall down. I was kind of looking for a more unique way to get involved in automotive and motorsports and dealing with a lot of, the OEM side of things and what goes into the car and what makes motorsports magical and all of that stuff. That was kind of where I found the passion in the space.
Yeah. Just absolutely beautiful. And a very inspiring story. I'm simultaneously in awe and jealous of your path. I think that's just fantastic.
So how did that little foray through the automotive industry change that perspective on how mechanics feel about engineers?
So honestly, I just think I've grown a lot of respect for it, for both being a mechanic and being an engineer. I will say my biggest gripe within automotive design is that everything is just becoming so compact, where the car that I first learned how to drive on was a 1977 Lincoln Continental, and just big boat of a vehicle. I think they're like 17 and a half feet long. Like they're large vehicles. But my dad was always a big fan of classic cars, so he always kind of had one, throughout, many different cars here and there. And to me, I was like, if I can drive and park this and parallel park it, I was like, an SUV is going to seem like a mini coupe at that point to me, which was absolutely true. And that was a car, though, whenever I worked on it, occasionally my dad would say, like, I don't know what it's doing. I don't really want to take it to the shop because it did, he'd have to get it towed there. And he's like, can I save money on a tow? Can you look at it and figure it out? And I remember that car was so unique because I could literally stand in the engine bay. And honestly, I could probably tuck down into it and close the hood and I would still fit in there perfectly fine. The engine can't run on Rebecca though. So, but that was something that was so unique to me. But when I started as a mechanic, I noticed everything has become so miniaturized, and everything is compact. And that led me to a lot of, I guess, decisions where there's cars that I hated working on because, if you have to swap, I think it's like a 2011 Camaro, to get it like the secondary fuel filter, you have to put the car up on a lift and drop the gas tank out of it. And I remember thinking when I first did that, I'm like, I have to quote a customer hundreds of dollars for a filter. And I was like, that's unacceptable. Like if I brought a car in, I was like, yeah, it just, the code came up, I need a filter change on it. And, there's primary, secondary, sometimes tertiary, depending on what vehicle you have. And I remember thinking, I was like, I, in my right mind, cannot imagine how this car was designed with that and that got past somebody. Like they were like, yeah, that seems fine. So to me, it's one of the things I wish cars were built to be more modification and maintenance friendly. That's kind of my gripe. So any designs that I've worked in, whether automotive or any other type of machine, I have always said, I don't want another engineer's opinion. I'm going to go get the maintenance tech because
Bingo.
he probably knows better about what is a good design or not. And a lot of engineers just turn into yes men where they look at the design, they say, yeah, that looks great. I'm like, okay, but if it takes something that, changing a fuel filter out or something like that should take 5 minutes, but if it's going to take me an hour and I need a lift for it and all this equipment, I'm like, no, we're going to change the design. That would be my instinct as an engineer.
That's all a rather secondary priority to making the assembly of the thing as profitable as possible, right?
Yes, it's definitely, I think everybody is concerned about profits at the end of the day. And I think we've seen that in not just the automotive space, but I think there's far and few companies out there that really prioritize, like, let's get this right. And then everything else comes secondary to that. Because if you have a good product, in my opinion, I think people are always going to pay premium price for it. That's what we want as consumers. And as long as it's reasonable, I don't want to pay a premium price for something that was put together not well, or that the maintenance costs are going to be terrible on it or anything like that. So it's thinking about not just building the car and getting it off the line, because that's where it ends for the vehicle manufacturer. To me, it's, different things about how can we engage a consumer beyond that and really make them a fan of the brand for life. There's something that, although I'm a Ford gal, I will say Chevy has done that fantastic with like their truck program. If you register your vehicle, and there are people, this program started in like the 70s, and they still send you like, congrats, you just hit like 300,000 miles on your car, or like you've had this Chevy, in your ownership or whatever for 25 years, and they just send you a t-shirt and stickers. And it's such a minuscule cost for them, but I look at that and I'm like, man, I want that for my like cars and trucks. And it's just something that's so cool because people have this pride for the brand and pride for what they own. And it's something that I wish that continuation would be for, like, I don't want to hear from my vehicle manufacturer only when there's a recall. I want to hear about, this is my experience and this is why I love the brand, and kind of that continued communication.
Yeah. You're talking about recalls, and, your talk of the fuel filter location. And, I have a sister-in-law who is a automotive service writer, and she could speak to how many, hundreds of thousands of dollars that the manufacturer has to pony up every time that there's a recall, or, that something has to be done under warranty. And the manufacturer pays for that, not the dealership. But then, the manufacturer pays for the dealership to do that work. And yeah, you say, I don't know how many pennies you save by locating the fuel filter in the inaccessible place on the assembly line versus how many thousands of dollars you have to pay for someone to replace that thing, under warranty.
To Ben's point, though, I mean, is this poor design, looking at a fuel filter that's above the fuel tank? Let's call that poor design for the moment. If this poor design, is it a trend, and is it all designed that way in the effort to increase profits, or is it simply bad design and people just don't get it?
I think honestly, it's a little bit of both. Having, my very short stint that I worked at BMW, and it was shortened simply by the fact that I started working in January 2020. So when the pandemic hit, every company fell apart in different ways. So my only and I ended up leaving the company in around May, but it was something for me that I sort of realized that I was like, they have a lot of people involved in the process. Granted, BMW is a German company, and Germans are famous for their love of bureaucracy. So there's a lot of red tape that you've got to kind of cut through when getting designs approved, and who gets a say in what, and all of these different things. Like I remember there was an instance where there's alignment holes on a chassis or any body of a vehicle, and it's to align where different parts are installed for different tooling. And they were making a hole like 1 millimeter bigger, and it required approval from 76 different people.
Oh
and
my God.
And like half of them, I think it was like 40 some of them, sat over in Europe, mainly in Germany, some in Austria, different places. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks like just getting people's signature, getting on a call with them, explaining why we're making this hole bigger, and going over the risk process of what is this, very small amount of metal that we're taking out of the car. How does that affect like weight and balance and all that stuff? So there's a lot of different intricacies that go into, to me, kind of very silly design decisions. And then things of like, fuel filter placement, just people don't think about it sometimes because they're like, well, it's not my problem after that point. And personally, I think, from my education and what I was taught while getting my engineering degree, to me, that's lazy and irresponsible engineering. And that's what we're taught not to do. It's not like you get the contract, you shake your hand, you do the work that you're, told. And then after that, you're like, well, I'm not going to be the one to repair it. That's going to be a maintenance tech. That's going to be this person, whoever. And I'm like, that's not my goal. It's to design something that's really well so that the maintenance tech, while he's, wrenching on something, is like, wow, this is really thought out well. I may never hear that compliment, but that's something for me that whenever I've designed anything in automotive, I'm like, I have to think about that. Who is going to be looking at this part? Who's going to have their hands on it? How is it going to affect safety and different things, and maintainability, all of that. And I think that some manufacturers just don't really think that all the way through, and some that do kind of have to make that compromise. They say, well, it's going to make this X amount more expensive, and everyone is obsessed with cutting costs, but at the end of the day, I'm like, you're not passing that on to the consumer. So it's not something for me or, the, tech that's going to be working on your car, the mechanic, anybody. They're not going to know that, oh yeah, this saved the, company 12 cents per car, but it's going to cost them, if there is a recall or something like that, an extra hour of labor or something. I'm like, I don't see how it's something that's, viable in the long term. I think eventually there's a point where something is going to be as cheap as humanly possible, but it's not going to be good and people aren't going to buy it, or it's not going to be safe.
An interesting exception is in the really high-end cars, where a lot of things are just really disastrously designed, and it does not matter because the car is so expensive that the rich person who buys it is going to sell it on before anything starts going wrong anyway. So the only person who has to deal with it is the guy like you and me who aspirationally wants to own something like that and sees a 7-year-old Bentley or V12 Mercedes or something for sale for $5,000 on Craigslist. And the reason is because it needs some of those crazy things they just put nothing into on the front end. A good example of that I just recently heard about was on the early 2000s Bentley Continental. There's a vacuum line that runs on top of the transmission. And when it leaks, all kinds of things go wrong. And replacing it with a sturdier one is a $5,000 job if you pay somebody to do it.
Yeah, that's like what our friend of the show, Ronnie Matthew, once said when he was a BMW technician, who ironically worked for my sister-in-law. But he said that, well, yeah, that BMW says that the automatic transmission fluid is good for the life of the vehicle. But then their definition, the life of the vehicle is the life under the first owner, who is typically going to sell it as soon as it gets out of warranty anyway. So
Amazing.
Yeah,
So,
there's
Rebecca.
there's like an interesting part with that too, because you think about that. I have many friends that are honestly outside of the engineering space, and they lease their vehicles, and it's like when it's 3 or 5 years old, they're like, oh, this thing is ancient, and I'm like, that's brand spanking new to me. I'll say my 2007 Ford. I'm like, yeah, it was in the 2000s, like I was only born in 98, but I still think I'm like, yeah, that's the 1900s. That's what people are saying, it's, and the 30-year mark for being considered antique is kind of wild to me in the automotive space, because I'm just like, we learn about these things, and I was like, these are the cars that are still running, but you have something that's new, to me at least, only a few years old, and they start having all these issues, and they devalue so quickly because of that. Because you shouldn't, honestly, like, to me, like, if you see a 2012 and it's going for like $5,000, I'm like, it's got to have like 250,000 miles on it. Like, there's no reason it should be that cheap. But it's because they're really not built for that, the true life of the vehicle. It's for the life of the first owner. And I believe in, if you buy a vehicle, I expect it to run reasonably well for 10 plus years, but things nowadays are being designed for much shorter than that. And I couldn't tell you why that is, but it's
something that, make them last less time, you sell more after you replace more. And this is something that worries the hell out of me. I got my degree in environmental science, and so we hit when I was a little kid back in the 70s, we had, I forget how many cars on the road, but I've read statistically that there are now, in 50 years, we've doubled the number of cars in the United States, but they last shorter and shorter and shorter with every generation. So there's this like exponential snowballing of not only resource consumption, but disposal. Where does that system crash?
Right.
I'm going to be honest. I think we're already at the point of crashing, to be honest.
Probably.
It's something that you just don't feel. It's like the ripples after an earthquake or something. You don't really notice that something is going, or that something is as bad as it is until many years later. Exactly. And I think in environmental conditions, of course, that's just heightened, because some people will just point blank refuse to believe that these things exist, or that they're explicitly tied to one thing or another, because it's kind of after effects from it.
Yeah.
Like, I know, just speaking of sustainability and just automotive design and manufacturing, like when I worked at BMW, there was instances where they said if the car takes more than, like, I think the line was about like 15-20 minutes, like you go through the entire factory, the car is built, quality check happens. But sometimes there is like the first thing that comes into once a car is like, okay, it's been through paint, it gets its VIN etched on it. Sometimes this robotic program that etches the VIN puts an extra line on a VIN. Mm-hmm. That means the car cannot ever be put on roads legally, because you're not allowed to modify a VIN in any way. You can't just take the plate off. You can't do anything like that. So what BMW does is they say it's actually cheaper for them to build the entire vehicle, have it go through the entire production line, and then crush the car than it is for them to just take that body off. And, because you've got to stop the production line. And it's like, I think every second of production time is equated to, like, at the time that I worked there, was like $17,500, not per minute, but per second. And that to me was a wild thing. And like they always had so many cars that were, going to a crusher, and honestly, they have like parking spaces set up so that you can watch them get crushed, because that was like their, I don't know, I guess like a
entertainment.
Yeah, it was essentially, they're like, if you get stressed, just take one of the, cars and you can go out there. But it's a huge facility, and some of those cars they would turn into like what they called yard cars, which, since the factory is over 7 million square feet, it takes quite a bit of time to walk from one place to another. So they have these cars that essentially were messed up on the production line, and you can just drive them around the factory, and every department has a few of them. So, nice to have that. But I'll say, like, for sustainability purpose, I remember learning about that, and I was thinking, like, they don't even like take the tires off the car or anything, like everything gets crushed in it. Like, and I just remember thinking, I sat there on like every week and would get like my entire tuition worth crushed in front of me. And I was thinking, how can it be cheaper, just because maybe an assembly for something, quality checks, they're like, these people are like, yeah, we can swap out maybe like a turn signal bulb, but like if 2 turn signal bulbs like blew out on the vehicle, crush it. It's more than 15 minutes.
That sounds too like the Germans have gotten away from what they pioneered a couple decades ago with making cars easier to get apart. Because the Germans were running out of junkyard space. They were looking at how cars are made and to make them easier to do the end of life thing with. It sounds like that's gone out the window in this case.
They're probably buying someone else's junkyard space.
Yeah, outsourcing that to a different country. Send it over to Poland. Yeah.
And it's definitely something, I don't know if that's the Americanization of it or something like that, but like every place I've worked, I've seen, fallacies in their manufacturing, whether it's from a sustainability perspective or any other. And I think it was like, okay, like I want to fix this. And they're, having a response of, no, it's okay. This is still most profitable. And just being so concerned by that is just wild to me that, profitability at the end of the day is going to be king. Absolutely. And I understand that to have, a viable business, that has to be true. But I don't think that needs to come at the point of sacrificing anything else in the vehicle.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think what you're talking about requires a cultural change as well, not just it's going to be a business value that's driven by some sort of cultural change. And you're right. I think we are looking at the after effects of an earthquake that's already happened. Now the question is, do we, especially as Westerners, do we turn around and get away from building a disposable society? And I think that the answer has to be yes, but that's a conversation for another day. Rebecca, we are rapidly running out of time. This is fantastic. I think we could talk day and night. So let me first say, I haven't talked to my brethren about this yet, but if you ever felt like joining in on a podcast, we would certainly welcome you as a regular on the Thing About Cars. So let me extend that invitation to you right now.
Thank you.
And the second question I have before we get into the official questions at the end of the show, should this episode be called "Life is Too Short to Drive a Boring Car," or should we call it "This Engine Can't Run on Rebecca"?
Honestly, I like the first one because it's the start of my origin story. So, it's great. And, that's where I started, and that's where I'm starting with my first episode on this podcast. So I'm sure, now that the invitation is extended, there will be more. So I think, that's a great one.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. And I will add you to our little, we have a behind the scenes Facebook group. So if you're on Facebook, let me add you to that. And gentlemen, do we have any other questions for Rebecca before I do the end of show questions?
No. Yeah. Rebecca, do you have any current involvement in motorsports at any level?
So I, throughout the years of I think even in college and now, I love doing FSAE in college. And thankfully, when I worked at Mitsubishi, I had the head of my department, he actually ended up owning a Frog Eye Bug Eye. So I ended up being kind of pit crew for him, which was really cool. So I've been to Sebring a bunch, racing with him, and I'd love to pick that up again. But I do have quite a bit of involvement just doing different things with IMSA and within SRO's race series. You know, whenever they come to Sebring, or if anybody's at Daytona or any of the lovely dirt tracks that we have here in Florida, going to the Freedom Factory. You know, Florida to me is like its own unique motorsports capital because we have so much here. So I love getting involved in it, not so much, I guess, as a driver myself or even pit crew anymore, but I always try to get at least like our SAE students involved and trying to connect them with internships to see if that's something that they like to do. And we love tabling at those events. I still go to Cars and Coffee and tell people that, you know, like if you like doing this and you have kids, you know, it's a great way to get them involved, because all car shows are kind of, you can look but don't touch. But if you bring one of the FSAE cars, I'm like, please touch it, get inside it, like learn more about it, get excited about it. And that's really engaging for kids. So that's kind of one of my passion projects going forward. And I guess from a work side of things, I do try to every year go to the Formula E race in Portland, because ABB is a sponsor of that. And I'll definitely be going to more NASCAR races now that we've announced that partnership. So very excited there. And yeah, I think my involvement in motorsports, it's evolved and it's done a lot of different things, but I love getting involved in really any way possible.
Awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. All right, Rebecca, you ready?
Yes.
End of questions. End of episode questions. All right, question number 1. What is your dream car?
Okay, so I obviously am a big fan of Fords. So I would say that I'd really like a 1969 Shelby GT500, or like one of the Boss 302s, like fastback and everything. Like those are probably my dream cars. And newest car I would ever own is probably the 2013 Shelby GT500, because that was the last one that Carroll Shelby worked on before he died. So kind of a very unique sense of his accomplishments throughout his life in the last living part of him today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good stuff. Question number 2, where's your next road trip going to be?
Ooh, so road trips, I actually don't have any planned right now, but I do have a friend that he just got a great new job offer and is moving to London. So he said, before I, go across the pond, he's like, we've got to plan like an epic road trip. And his family has a cabin up in Georgia. So I'd really like to go, Blue Ridge, maybe do like the Tail of the Dragon up there. So I think that would be really exciting.
Yeah.
Nice.
And not to rain on the Tail of the Dragon, but there are many other good Kirby roads up there. Don't feel like you have to lock yourself into that one.
Right. And if you're going to do Tail of the Dragon, do it on a weekday, because on the weekends, there's too many slow Harley riders who can't get through the turns.
Question number 3. What's the most fascinating thing you've seen on the road or in someone's garage?
Most fascinating, honestly, I'd say like through my time just in involvement in SAE, I have a lot of great friends that they have really unique machine shops. And one of them actually, who was involved in SAE at UCF, he ended up buying one of the old Formula cars, and he suspended it upside down from his shop. So when he had customers walk in, they always looked up there and they're like, wow, that's really cool. Tell me about that car. So obviously also very unique to see a Formula car upside down. So I think that was probably one of my favorite things. And I do just love kind of seeing that, because again, that's like where he kind of started with engineering and everything. So
Right. And the last question, as our audience knows, is something that's wacky and unpredictable. I have a list of these silly questions here. I might ask 2 of them. So what's your favorite food?
Ooh, my favorite food. Honestly, so I'm a big pasta gal, but I love fettuccine Alfredo, which I know is like the very basic, it's just a cheesy pasta. It doesn't really exist. Like, I went to Italy and I was like, I want to get authentic fettuccine Alfredo. Turns out that fettuccine Alfredo does not originate in Italy. So I was humbled the first time I went there with that. But yeah, I'd say that's one of my favorite foods. But honestly, I'm a steak gal at the end of the day. So I also just love a good fresh grilled ribeye and some potatoes on the side. Meat and potatoes are the fuel for me.
Now I'm hungry. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I will never shame anyone else's pasta preferences. That fettuccine Alfredo is an art form. So let's go ahead and do a second frivolous, silly question here. You're hosting a dinner party and can invite one famous person, living or dead. Who would you invite?
Ooh, okay. So I'm gonna say hands down, it's got to be Taylor Swift. I I've been a fan of Taylor Swift for as long as I can remember, honestly, and I think that I'm incredibly grateful to have grown up with a really great role model in her. And I think that she's a fantastic businesswoman and just, has incredible work ethic. And I would just, love to sit down with her and talk about life and talk about all that she's accomplished, because that list is a very, very long list. And I can only imagine how it feels to be so well awarded and accomplished in life.
That is awesome. Rebecca, thank you for being our guest today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Before we get to Tim's answer here, I wanted to ask if people wanted to learn more about SAE or how to even get involved in the automotive industry, whether as an employee or an educated consumer, how would you suggest they learn more about these things?
One, I love talking about SAE, so I feel like I'm a great point of contact if anybody is interested. I am involved in just about everything that SAE does because it's like an addiction. I can't get away from it. But I'd also say, check out SAE.org, SAFlorida.org as well if you're in the state of Florida. And that's a website, I built and manage. So it's something that's really cool. And I'm really passionate about just being able to talk about all of the stuff that SAE does. And it's great to see everything that SAE is involved in. And then you can pick and choose from there what you'd like to get involved with.
Sure. Yeah. And there's a lot. So yes, absolutely. Yeah. Tim, take us out with the answer to the trivia question, if you don't mind.
Okay, let's take it from the top. What was the origin of the Porsche 911 model name in the early 60s? Was it because as a car model primarily designed for North America and the US has just started using 911 emergency phone number service, that the marketing was read to say Porsche 911, no emergency, just excitement? B, the new 2.0 liter H6 in the car generated 204 foot-pounds of torque, which converts to the metric 911 newtons. C, Porsche was originally going to call the 901, but Peugeot complained that it was too similar to the many three-digit with a zero in the middle Peugeot model names, and Porsche had already purchased a bunch of numbers to apply to the cars, so they decided to simply use an additional 1 in place of the 0. Or D, following the success of its 906 and 908 prototype racing cars, Porsche decided to capitalize on this by naming the next series of road cars with a three-digit number that started with a 9, and the 909 and 910 concepts did not make it to production, but the 911 did. So we'll solicit for answers here. Mickey, we'll go with you first.
I was going to say, let's start with Rebecca. Give her the first guess.
I'm going to put her on the hot seat. Okay.
Yes.
So I honestly, option C doesn't sound too bad because we just talked about everybody's, trying to do stuff for profitability, but I'm going to have to go with A because I really hope it's true. So I want that. I feel like that's a really great marketing part. So I'm going to go with A.
Okay. Vicky?
I'm going to go with D, just because I have this weird idea that they were numbering their prototypes and the 911 is the one that they ended up producing. So,
okay. And Ben?
Yeah, I'm going with D as well. I think A seems the least likely for a variety of reasons, but
it's fun. It's just fun. It
is. But D sounds
I want it to be true.
Yeah,
right.
I'm willing it.
D is the most German logic.
Yes.
All right.
And the answer is actually C. It was originally going to be called the 901, but Peugeot complained, and Porsche had already purchased a bunch of the number supply of the cars, so they decided to simply put in an additional 1 in place of the 0. And this is from PorscheStratham.com.
Wow.
That's hilarious. Well, thank you, Tim.
Yes.
Good trivia. Absolutely good trivia. And Rebecca, thank you again for being our guest today. Again, I hope we can do some more of this in the future, and I hope you get to enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of the Thing About Cars family. If you have suggestions for guests or topics we should cover on the program, don't hesitate to contact us at thethingaboutcars.com. We also have a Facebook page where it works just as well as email. And we'll hopefully get your suggestions and talk about your car problems online. In the meantime, stay safe on the roads. We'll see you with another episode in roughly a week. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This has been The Thing About Cars. We'll see you on the road.